All right, it looks like we're gathered. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Hi, my name's Louise. I'm going to assume that most of you in the room know one person at this table, and it's not me, and it's not Matt.
It's not me either.
So we run this podcast. We like to get out and chat with people and just have a silly time. This will be recorded. It's going to be available on podcast channels, so you'll be able to access it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, anywhere where you can get these podcasts. So it's an audio format, so it's going really well, live in the room. And yeah, this is our first ever live recording. So thank you so much for being part of that. You are now all a part of this moment. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you to Gavin for the invitation. And I noticed that you are a very lovely, respectable, polite audience. I would like you to remain lovely, but if you can do less of the respectable and polite, that would be perfect for the vibe we're going for.
I do deserve heckling sometimes. Not very good, but I do.
You can heckle Matt, don't heckle me.
Please.
So, yeah, please do cheer when we mention that we're doing a live podcast recording and we've got an audience. Let people know that you're here. Perfect. More of this. That's wonderful. And because we're recording as well, we're not always going to be speaking like we're talking to a room full of people who are already super engaged in the subject and came to a conference about science and religion. So just bear in mind if it's a bit like, why is she telling me that? We're here for you, but we're also here for the listeners. And I also want to keep reminding you that this is being recorded so that you can go away and tell your friends and family and they can listen to it as well. So I think that's it. From here, I am gonna, in a sec, ask Chris to play the soundtrack, and then I will do a proper intro spiel for the podcast. That was all just for you guys. And then we will get into some conversation with Matt and with David, who will introduce for the listeners as well as for you guys. So let's go. Let's have a soundtrack, please, Chris.
Just before we start, are you recording? Just check.
It says 4:56 and it's going up. That means yes, right? Really technically proficient.
Good.
Welcome to the Now There's a Thought podcast. Today, a podcast host, a priest, and an astrophysicist walk into a bar to talk about science fact, science fiction, and science theology. Today, our bar is a stage. We are live at the Christians in Science 80th Anniversary Conference in Birmingham. Welcome to the Now There's a Thought bar. If you're live in the room, I hope you've picked up your drink. We have. And if you're listening at home, I'm afraid you'll have to buy your own drink. Cheers. So, welcome to the podcast. Our guests in the audience. My name is Louise. I will be your host for this podcast. I am joined by the Reverend Matt Davis.
Thank you for using my title.
I think it's the first time I've ever used your title.
Yes.
For the benefit of the listeners, Matt is my brother-in-law. So we have had several conversations in which I have not called him Reverend Matt.
If you are the praying kind, please pray for her as well for that.
So Matt is a vicar in Wales and has joined us to fulfill the podcast host and priest section of the title. And we are joined by our guest, astrophysicist, theologian, prolific author, Reverend Professor David Wilkinson. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. And it's rare that I'm talked about as Reverend Professor. I'll take David. It's fine.
Love it. Thank you so much. It is a little bit shorter, a little bit punchier.
Reverend for me, please.
All right, Reverend Matt. So David started in astrophysics and then moved on into theology, likes to bring the two together. And your day job, I believe you are the professor of theology at St. John's College in Durham.
Yeah.
And the things you two have in common are fancier titles than mine and an appreciation of Star Trek, I believe.
Yeah, loved Star Trek as a kid. As a child, I used to wait until my mother finished using one of those powder compacts, you know, the type of thing that you put. And I would wait until she'd finished it, and I'd ask for it and say, can I have it? And then I'd jump around the house, kind of flicking it open and saying, beam me up, Scotty. I used to get makeup all down one side of my face. But I grew up with Star Trek in the 1960s, late 1960s, 70s. And then in the different franchises that followed after that. Loved it.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's great.
You guys are just going to have your own little nerd
We
fest
could talk
here.
about, Star Trek.
You probably came to a later series of Star Trek, did you?
Yeah, I think it was DS9 for me, and then on.
I mean, you are so young. That is unbelievable.
Incredibly young. I even watched the animated series.
Did you? Wow.
That's like the new one. But yeah.
Anyway, let's get to know David through means other than Star Trek for people like me who don't understand what these two are talking about. So we have some quick-fire questions which are carefully calibrated to get truly to the core of the person. So we're going to run through these really quickly. Firstly, who are you and where do you come from?
I'm David, as you just said, and I come from Durham, where I work, and Newcastle, where I live. We live in Jesmond in Newcastle, where my wife is a Methodist pastor, and we've always lived where she has ministered. And then I pop into Durham from time to time.
Excellent, excellent. And of your fancy titles, which one is your favourite?
Granddad. Just at the moment. I've just had my first grandchild. Yeah. As if I had anything to do with it. People coming up and congratulating me. And she's 7 months old at the moment. And it is the most wonderful thing, actually. And far more impressive than receiving an academic title from a university.
Yeah. Very good. Very
Absolutely.
good.
Wonderful. Who's your favourite Disney princess?
Ooh, no. Snow White. I've got to go with the classics.
That is a classic.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, what's your favourite type of chair?
Recliner.
Yeah.
I've always dreamt of having a reclining chair. And never been able to have one.
We are a granddad now, so maybe it's like a gift to you.
That's true. I mean, it's those kind of chairs that you see in the middle of Tipping Point in the afternoon, the adverts, which raise you up. And then, I mean, I'm at that stage of life now.
It does feel like it's inappropriate for a granddad, to be fair. I feel like you should go for it. If you had to change the colour of the sky, what colour would it be?
Change the colour of the sky?
Yeah.
Everything within me as a physicist resists that question completely. Do you know how colour is? No. Well, let me just say, I just love blue sky. So, blue sky during the day, and then, of course, as dark as you can make it at night. Because all of this street lighting means that it's difficult to see the stars. And that's one of the real problems that we have in terms of our appreciation that we're part of the cosmos. So blue during the day and as dark as possible at night. And if you go up to the northeast in Northumberland to Kielder Observatory, Kielder Reservoir, it's a dark sky area. It's wonderful just to see the universe in that way.
Amazing. So what we're saying is the system's working. Don't mess with it.
Don't mess with it. I mean, you know, there may be problems with global warming if you mess with it too much in terms of the colours, but I think we're okay.
All right, all right. Finally, I need to know if you have some serious thoughts on bubble tea.
On bubble tea, I've never had it, but I know. I mean, this is because I'm so old. So many of the students that I talk to, I mean, it's just the big thing at the moment. What's your view of it, Louise?
I love a bit of bubble tea, but it has to be the original kind with the chewy bubbles, not
with
the
chewy
bursting
bubbles.
ones.
See, at school when I was a kid, we had tapioca. We called it frog's eggs, and it was just awful. I mean, it's different now.
Yeah, no, we're deliberately putting tapioca balls in our drinks.
Yes, exactly. Strange.
Wild. All right, that's. I think we've got to the core of your being. I think we know you now.
That's about all that's
We're
interested
besties.
about me. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Inside and out.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to play a silly little game that we like to do, which is called... Here we go. It's time for a game! Today we're playing Is It Science? So what we're going to do is I've got 3 random objects, and I would like you, David, to argue for 1 minute for each object that they are science.
Yes.
And Matt, I would like you to argue that each object is not science.
Okay.
After each one, we're going to pause for a clapometer. We've got the room. We're going to decide who has won each round. Now, I feel like there may be some bias in the room. So, Matt, I feel like you need to pull something out of the hat.
I am confident that I can pull this off. Like, you know, I've got all the bravado I need, really. So
exactly.
Yeah,
no, I knew you'd be fine.
Yeah,
this is great. Yeah. So, we will start. We'll start with David, because Matt's got all the bravado he needs.
Terrified, actually.
Your item, which I'd like for you to argue for a full minute, is science, is a cotton bud. Starting now.
Cotton bud is wonderful because it's produced by scientists who thought to themselves, we've got an awful lot of wax in our ears, because scientists have lots of wax in their ears. Lots of hairs in their ears as well, by the way, if you look at senior professors. And so a cotton bud was created in order to solve a problem. And not only that, but to do so in a beautiful, elegant way. For there's nothing more symmetrical than a cotton bud. You put it on its end, it spontaneously breaks symmetry, and from that you're able to talk about how the early universe broke symmetry and went through a period of inflation. So the cotton bud is not only useful, but it's also a wonderful illustration of early physics in the universe. Am I up to a minute yet?
15 seconds.
15 seconds. And it's cheap. And science is worth investing in when it gives you appropriate technology like cotton buds.
Didn't even need the full minute. Right. Are you ready, Matt? You've got one minute to argue that a cotton bud is not science. Starting now.
As every good audiologist will be able to tell you, an ear doctor, you should not put cotton buds in your ears to clean them. It's very bad for them. I think we know this. So it's not science in that way, disproven. The other way it's not science is that you can use it for cleaning, and you can use it for applying makeup and stuff. That's cosmetology and cleaning, not science. Although it's got ology in it, that's like makeup and stuff, isn't it? Not science. The other thing why a cotton bud is not science is because you can flick them at people.
Yeah.
And that's not very nice. Again, not really science, but it's not good science at least. Possibly bad science. But
well, it depends whether you hit someone. I mean, that's
I
good
suppose,
science.
Yeah, but you know, you'd have to do an experiment then, and then it would be science, but then you're doing the experiment, not the cotton bud, so not science. How long have I got left, Liv? This is hard. And also, no, I'm done. Yeah.
All right. Congratulations to both participants.
Thank you.
Much like I need a drink after that. Okay, room, it is your turn. We're going to run the clapometer. So if you think that David won that round, I would like you to cheer now. It's a respectable cheer. It's a respectable cheer.
Very good,
okay.
very good.
Yeah.
If you think that Matt won that round, sorry, Reverend Matt won that round, I would like you to cheer now.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Thank you. Graciously accept.
Incredible. Matt takes the first round. And it is Matt's turn to go first.
Okay. Right,
so,
can rebut me
let me
now.
reset my timer. Grab my whistle. I whistled this by hand, by the way. I need you all to appreciate my whistle. Thank you.
It looks like a stick for those listening in.
It does look like a
She's
stick.
blowing into a stick.
That's because I made it out of a stick.
Good.
All right. Matt, you're going first. You have 1 minute to argue why a crest, like a coat of arms crest, is not science. Starting now.
So, main reason a coat of arms crest is not science is because if you look at most coat of arms, they've got animals on, but also mythical animals, and myths, not the realm of science. Story, which is important, but it's not science. Also, when you look at some of the old ones, like how they draw lines and stuff, that ain't right. It's not anatomically correct. It's doing some weird stuff. Like, look at a lion on an England badge. That ain't a proper lion. If that was out in the wild, you'd probably want to put it down, poor thing. You know what I mean? Again, not science. And then when you think about putting it together, it's art, and art is beautiful, and art is needed, and art draws us to wonder and can draw us to science, but isn't necessarily science in itself. So I would say that a coat of arms, while very pretty, can be meaningful, it is not really science. And I'm going to take a smug 5-second silence to finish off. Thank you.
Had to let him have his smug 5 seconds. Right, okay, David, you have a minute to argue why a crest or a coat of arms is science, starting now.
I have to say that I am outraged by my learned friends. Two cultures splitting science from stories and art. Because we know that science involves stories and images. In fact, the importance of image to a scientist in drawing diagrams, in drawing how you envisage physical systems is really important. Now, it's fair to say, Matt, that very few crests or coat of arms have atoms or planetary systems within them. And they should have, because really, that would make it a little more science. I take your point about the mythical creatures, but story to science is really important. We tell stories. Albert Einstein told stories about two twins, one going off in a spaceship near the speed of light, one staying at home. I mean, that's a story. It communicates science.
Ooh.
I need another minute.
Need another minute. All right, fantastic work from both of you there. If you think in the room that David won that round, I would like you to whoop and cheer and go crazy now. All right, and if you think Matt won that round, I would like you to cheer now.
Whoa.
You've got some
2-0.
loud
I
fans,
don't think
Matt.
we need the third one.
I say, these are quite difficult. We haven't seen these either. There's something important to say. We've no idea what these are. This is all off the top of our heads.
This is genuinely, I have 2 sets of notes, one for the guests and one for myself, so that they don't see everything, so that they can be as surprised as you are when I start asking them whether a cotton bud is science. Your next one, whose turn to go first? David, it's your turn to go first. See if you can pull a point back.
I don't think so. I think it's hopeless cause, but I'll have a go.
Let's have a go. You
you.
have a minute to argue, please, that prayer is science. Off you go.
Prayer is one of those subjects that intersects with science in lots of different ways, because it poses the question, how does God act in the world? And when we pray, although many of us think that prayer is about changing ourselves, within the traditions of Christian prayer has always been the sense of asking God to act in the world. Now, how God acts in the world has a scientific dimension to it. That doesn't mean that we can explain how God acts in the world purely through science, but it interacts with our scientific view of the world. And one of the problems with the Newtonian mechanistic universe was that it began to rule out the possibility of God acting in the world. So it's not science in the sense of science, but it interacts with science. And then finally, we sometimes experiment in prayer.
We do. That's the point.
That was a bit serious, wasn't it? That's very good, yeah. Very good.
All right. We have our argument for. Now against, please, Matt. Why is prayer not science, starting now?
It's like just having a chat, isn't it?
Do scientists not chat?
Do you need some more? I don't. Right, no, it's talking to God. It's communication at the end of the point. And while you can sum up some communications in science and how things interact, some things are unknown, and I think prayer is one of them. There was an interesting study done recently about children behaving like water vapour. Did you see that one? preschool children behave like water vapour, apparently. Very similar in terms of states of matter. And that's fascinating. But still, if you get a bunch of children in here running around, you're not going to think water vapour. You're going to think there's a bunch of children running around. And the same with prayer, is that it's what we observe and what we know is very different. And while you may be able to scientifically think of it, I think when we interact with it, it becomes something else and something different.
It's good.
Not sure where I was going with that, really, to be honest with you.
I know, but the image of children as water vapour was just great. I mean, I'll be thinking about that for the rest of the night.
Last But One Nature podcast. Do you recommend it?
Yeah.
I feel like there's several people going to go back to their home churches or their families and just be like, children, I've got a task. I wish for you to run around and act like water vapour. Okay, fabulous. We got a bit existential, but the clapometer is still running. If you thought that David won that round, I would like you to cheer now, please.
That's a sympathy vote.
Way better.
That is a high bar this
Very
time.
high.
All right. If you thought that Matt won that round, please whoop and cheer now. Oh. That's a golf clap, guys.
Could have done a little bit more. Come on.
You told them they could heckle you.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Congratulations, David. You pulled a point back. It's a 2-1 to Matt.
Yes,
Very
a
good.
consolation goal.
Well, this was a little bit tricksy, Matt. I'm a little bit sorry. I did happen to know that David's written a book about prayer and how it interacts with science.
I feel cheated.
But I didn't actually push it myself, did I? I mean, I was tempted. Could you see me just tempted in the background?
You could have done the classic professor thing and quoted yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
It's been lovely.
To be honest, I'm at the age where I can't even remember what I wrote.
So David writes these books that are, as my lovely husband put it, basically kind of book-long thought experiments, guiding us through kind of what if I think about it in this way. So this book, When I Pray, What Does God Do? Sounds like a really straightforward title. But my friend rang me while I was reading it in preparation for this podcast and asked me to summarize it in a sentence. And I don't think I've ever used a longer sentence in my life. So I thought it'd be good to talk about that book a little bit and how you got there. And yeah, what drew you to writing and thinking about prayer in that way?
I think a number of things. I think the first is that, I mean, just as a committed Christian, you come across people claiming answers to prayer or what prayer's all about all of the time. You know, the Christian brother or sister who says, it was raining, I drove the car to Tesco, there wasn't a parking space, and so I prayed and immediately there was a parking space. And you think to yourself, well, praise the Lord, brother. Isn't that wonderful? But then, Lord, why do you answer that prayer, but nothing far more serious?
Absolutely.
Particularly when that brother actually would have done well to walk a little further. So there's that kind of issue. I think then there was a deeply personal issue, which was about an illness that my wife suffered from and continues to suffer from. And she was particularly ill when our kids were teenagers. And we struggled as a family and we struggled as a church as she led it, but wasn't able to work at all. You know, we prayed for her as a family. The church prayed for her. Many Christian friends around the world prayed for her. But God didn't seem to give an easy healing to that. And then I think the third thing, as I mentioned in the answer before, is I'm just fascinated as a scientist how we understand the world in relationship to how God both sustains and acts in the world. And so I've often had this sense of, just as you said, Louise, that too many of the answers that theologians give are too short a sentence, too simple a model, too easy a philosophical kind of thing. And often it limits God to only do certain things. But when you get to Scripture, one of the fascinating things is just how messy Scripture is. I mean, don't you think it would have been wonderful for Paul, in fact, to drop one of his letters and to have have a letter called Frequently Asked Questions. Wouldn't that just be brilliant? In which, how does God answer prayer would be one of them. But actually, what we've got in Scripture are stories, conversations, for instances, unanswered questions. Paul had a thorn in the flesh. What was that all about? A huge number of questions there, which means that Scripture reminds us not to become over simple on this. And that's partly what I was trying to do.
Absolutely. So in the book, you kind of talk about prayer from a personal perspective, like you say, like what happens, will God answer me? And like you say, with Scripture as well, and there's kinds of all kinds of examples of God does this in one instance, but not in the other. But also you get into some, by my standards, fairly complex physics of what might it look like actually physically when God responds. So a little bit about kind of chaos theory and that kind of thing. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's probably quantum theory and chaos theory. We haven't got long to do quantum theory and chaos theory together, but what they do is remind us, as John Polkinghorne used to say, that the world is more supple and more subtle than many of us thought. And the Newtonian worldview, this clockwork mechanism, was wonderful for some Christians because they thought to themselves, oh, that means there's a divine watchmaker, let's prove God.
Yeah.
The trouble is, if you've got a perfect mechanism, clock, how can God actually do anything apart from winding it up and starting it off?
Sure.
And so what quantum theory and chaos, which is about macro systems which have unpredictability in them, quantum theory, microsystems with unpredictability, is just a reminder that that Newtonian universe is not the world in completeness.
Yeah.
It works in some areas, but actually the world is much more open and much more interesting, much more surprising. And we shouldn't build our theology of God on a Newtonian clockwork universe. God is bigger than that.
Sure. So when we're talking Newtonian, we're talking these kinds of ideas that we learn at school, where it's, we feel like if we understand all these mechanisms, we can understand everything about the world, we can predict everything, we can know where it's going. And now we have certain scientific models that don't work like that.
Absolutely, and thank you. I mean, you've encapsulated it beautifully. Newtonian physics does work. We do a lot with it, but it's not a complete description of the world. The world is much more complex in terms of how it works and how the laws of physics describe different systems. And we can understand systems, we can understand the laws, but that doesn't mean that all systems are both predictable and picturable.
Yeah.
And that's the subtlety of moving beyond the Newtonian worldview. Now, the Newtonian worldview was, I think, a real curse for Christian theology, because it led to this sense that if God can't do anything in the world, then first of all, is God personal in any way? Does he relate to us in a chat with Matt in prayer?
Yeah.
But also, how do we understand the Bible? And the movement from Newtonian physics through into 19th century and 20th century theologians was to say, if miracles can't happen, then what's happening in the Bible? These stories mustn't be true, they must be made up. They're myths to express something about Jesus, but they didn't actually happen. And that was a real problem for Christian theologians, and remains a problem for Christian theologians, in really understanding that God is the God who acts.
Yeah. Do you think it can come in some ways as well, when we look for absolute answers to things in a very scientific way, where there maybe isn't a clear response there? We can say this is exactly what's happening here, especially when it comes to prayer and unanswered prayer as well.
Yeah, and I think we do like simple answers, don't we, Matt? I mean, we like neat, tidy systems.
Yeah.
Whereas you're very helpful image of prayer as conversation. I mean, a conversation like this is not neat and tidy. It's not a lecture. It's not presenting just one easy way. We're having a conversation together that has an openness to it. It has a messiness to it. It has you surprising us with having to describe objects as science or not. Now, the way that God relates to the universe for me cannot be reduced to simple model. There's something about the mystery of God in the midst of a world where God also speaks. So when God speaks in Revelation, in the life, death and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, which I believe, that doesn't give us an answer to every question. Yeah. It gives us certain answers to certain questions, but there's much more that we're asked to think about and work out in our discipleship, struggle with, persistently and with energy. And I mean, when we get to new creation, I don't know about you, I've got about 572 questions to ask of the Lord.
I've got 573 actually.
Yeah. That's right, including what a cotton bud's all about. So yeah.
Why can't I stick them in their ears when they feel so good?
So we're kind of inviting in all of this uncertainty and unanswered questions, both looking at the Bible and how we see the world and how we see God, and also in science. With all of this uncertainty, firstly, does your brain explode? And secondly, why do we bother? We're not going to get it.
Because there's something about the human person that I believe that God has given us as gift, which is about the ability to ask questions, to explore the world with curiosity. Donald Mackay, who we heard about earlier, one of the great founders of Research Sciences Christian Fellowship and Christians in Science, talked about the image of science as a child being allowed to explore a garden under the supervision of an adult, a parent, and the ability to explore and experiment out of curiosity. Some of it is a bit edgy. It's difficult at times. Some of it you don't fully understand, but there's something about exploring this world and exploring the nature of God, which is very different from the Greek view, which was, don't poke your nose into the realm of the gods. Yeah. That's just for the gods. That's not for us. Whereas the Christian sense of the gift of science was an invitation to struggle with questions, to explore, and to find answers. Let's be clear that the wonder of science, and indeed the wonder of theology, is to be able to say some things about some things. Yeah. It doesn't tell us everything, but we can understand the world. We can then use that understanding to hopefully make the world a better place. And that's true also, I think, that there are certain things that we can say about God. God is not completely mysterious, and God has spoken to us in Jesus so that we know something about something.
I think that's a really good point about kind of being able to explore things and look at things. Because go back to think about Paul writing a question and answer, because I think if you wrote that back then, especially about that Greek view, we would look at those answers and go, because it's always developing, isn't it? And it's
it is, and also that all truth is God's truth, but not all truth is scientific truth. So there is truth, as we know within Scripture, and we heard about it earlier this evening, in poetry, in story. That is not the way of scientific language or scientific experimentation. And yet there's something profound, which is that science is part of our exploration of the world, not the end story. And therefore, I think when we look at Genesis 1, I'd be interested in, your role as a priest, as a teacher of the Bible. But my sense is that often we've reduced Genesis chapter 1 to this is a scientific textbook. In fact, I think it's something far more profound than that.
Oh yeah, totally.
For me, it's worship, it's liturgy, it's song. So that if you had a podcast with the writer of Genesis as a guest, which would be far more interesting than this, and you asked how old is the universe, I suspect the writer of Genesis might say, to be honest, I'm not really interested in that. But let's all stand together and sing our praises to this wonderful God who created the whole world.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a reason why more than a how, I think, is that God created. It's lovely, isn't it? It's all good.
It's good.
It's good.
And let's praise the one who created it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's this kind of thing in our culture where we're really used to, if something is presented to us as truth, we expect it also to be fact. We feel like we're reading a newspaper article when actually it's speaking in a very different way. When we're talking about exploration, and you gave us that lovely image of a child exploring a garden, is there ever any kind of fear of discovering something that we don't like or that might be painful? Or I can imagine the child kind of lifting up a rock and finding a snake or something. What would be the scientific or theological equivalent of that?
Gosh, that's a good question. And I think, science often turns things up, uncovers rocks, which then we have to respond to with something that goes beyond science. For the past couple of years, Oppenheimer has been the big movie. It's a really powerful story of a number of physicists working on one particular problem, which was to get to the bomb before the Germans got there. But in doing so, caused a revolution in political, economic, national identities and power, where I don't think anyone at the time fully understood what was going to happen. So science brings with it risk.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in today in artificial intelligence, in genetic development, those type of things where there is risk in science. And a number of folk will say, let's not go into the garden at all. It's far too risky.
Yeah.
Let's not mess with this. But I remember a story that Jesus told about someone who left 3 servants an amount of money and said, off you go and use that money. 2 went off and used the money. 1 was so afraid that he dug a hole and put it in the ground.
Yeah.
And it's that one person that Jesus in the parable is condemning. And for me, that's a very strong reminder that I don't want to, on Judgment Day, be there and the Lord said, we gave you this capacity, but you didn't pursue it because you were too worried about the risks.
Yeah.
I think we've got to be real about the risks. And that involves a conversation not just with scientists, but with the wider culture. But it's a gift to be used. But it does bring risk with it.
And in that sense, is there ever a worry that you might discover something about God that you don't like very much?
Yes. Let me give you an illustration of that. 1999, against everything we expected in cosmology, we discovered that the universe was accelerating in its expansion. Not contracting eventually into a opposite of a big bang, a big crunch, but accelerating in expansion. And the problem with accelerated expansion is that energy gets smeared out, temperature of the universe goes down, things get ripped apart, structures can't stay. The universe becomes depressing, dark, cold. Heat death of the universe.
Grim.
Very sad.
Now, we're all right because, that'll only take effect in about 20 billion years or so. So we're all right for breakfast in the morning.
Excellent.
Very glad at that. I can say
But,
that's essential.
that's right.
Yeah.
But the end of a story is important for understanding a story. You wouldn't read a novel without reading the end of it. Now, for some folk, that sense of, gosh, the universe isn't getting better and better. What does that mean for God as creator? Has God lost control of it? Or how do you understand creation? Now, that was a challenge for a number of folk. Actually, for me, it became a way back into a very important theme within the Bible, which is not just about a celebration of creation, but the Christian view that God is working from creation to new creation, a new heaven and new earth. So that God's purposes go beyond this creation to a transformed new creation. So sometimes science can pose questions of God, but actually it's been my experience often that biblical theology is you see new things as science exposes things. And you begin to understand God at a much deeper and far more exciting level because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt, could you explain for us a little bit this idea of new creation versus the idea of heaven that some people might have, and this idea of, oh, we'll go to heaven when we die, it's fine.
Thank you for throwing me under the bus there. I opened a can of worms. So for those listening and those who don't know, is that in popular imagination is that when you die, you go to heaven, or you even hear sometimes that another angel has gone to heaven, which is equally just a bit of a foreshadowing of something. But the idea in the Bible isn't that we go up and sit on a cloud and we get through some pearly gates and we just chill out with all those we've loved before, but it's that God makes everything new, and that in Revelation it talks about God being with his people and them dwelling with him in a new city, in a new place, and there being no more death, no more tears, no more crying, no more mourning, and everything being made right and good, and kind of a resolution of things, which for me is much more helpful and hopeful than sitting on a cloud, because it gives us something more there. It gives us a purpose in the afterlife. We're not just sitting, we're doing with God, with the Creator, as we should be in completeness. Was that clear?
That was great. I feel like it's very poignant, and I'm like, I don't know where to go with this now. Let's just hear more about that. But we actually have a lot of exploring to do, as David's been talking about, in this creation as well. So let's think about some of those things. One of your other books is about, it's called God, Time and Stephen Hawking, an exploration into origins. And it's about kind of the origin of the universe and what is going on in space. It's very sci-fi. Like, from where I'm sitting, I know it's real. I know these things are actually things that you look at for like a job and they're out there, but to me, it feels very sci-fi. So could you talk a bit about what inspired you to write that, and maybe what you learned while writing it as well?
I'll answer the second thing first. You learn that writing is really quite a difficult thing when it comes to the origin of the universe and understanding it. And that's why there's a new version of that book, which Dave Hutchins, who's here this evening, actually largely wrote, and my name's on top of it well.
You mean you can't just say Jesus?
You can't just say Jesus. And the reason that you can't say that is what Charles Coulson many, many years ago talked about as the God of the gaps. Now, when Professor Stephen Hawking was at a conference at the Vatican, he reported that the Pope, in talking about the origin of the universe, said, science can explain most of the universe, but when it comes for the very first moment, that's the realm of God. Now, actually, the Pope didn't say that, as it happens, but that's what Stephen Hawking heard. And Hawking was motivated by that to begin to try and understand not just the evolution of the universe, but the starting conditions of the universe, saying that science must be part of that. Now, as a student, I used a very strong argument for the existence of God. I mean, I say it in all humility, but it went like this. If the universe began with a big bang, who lit the blue touch paper? Who set it off? Mm-hmm. Who set off the first explosion? I mean, it was a very powerful argument, but I think it was wrong, to be honest. And what Hawking was attempting to do was explain how that blue touch paper lit itself. Now, it's a very complicated thing that he tried to do, because he tried to bring together quantum theory and general relativity into a quantum theory of gravity, and we haven't got time to go into that in depth, I guess. Are you sure? Okay, that's right.
That would hurt my brain too much.
And he didn't have a theory to do that. He had to speculate what a theory would look like if he did that. But what he was hoping to do was to use quantum theory to explain the initial stages, the initial conditions of the universe. Now, again, going back to what we talked about before, that's a challenge for science. It was a challenge to if the universe began with a big bang, can I insert God into the gap as the answer?
Yeah.
And actually from that, my own journey was then to understand that actually the God of the Bible is not the God who simply reaches out his hand and lights the blue touch paper and then goes off for a cup of coffee, not to have anything more to do with the universe. The God of Scripture is the one who holds the universe in the palm of his hand, keeping it in existence. The one who holds, in whom all things hold together, as Paul writes about Jesus. So Jesus, in that sense, is the sustainer of the universe, the one in whom we find the order that we explain as scientists. And so part of it was my own thought experiment and journey to say, how do I think about a creator God in the light of some of this new physics that was happening? Yeah. And actually the exciting thing is, that's a bigger view of God than just a God who starts the whole thing off and then goes off and says, cheerio, see you on Judgment Day.
It's much more hopeful, isn't it? It's much more hopeful.
It is, and it's much more, it's about God's commitment to the universe. The God of the Bible is the God who is continuously committed, not just to human beings, but to the whole universe. God doesn't write us off and say, well, that's the end of that, I'll start again. This is a God whose love is about commitment and ongoing commitment. And that's a much bigger view of God.
I love that. And I love the idea that you can take something that is, oh, how do these molecules behave and what are these particles doing? And actually it tells you something about who God is.
Yeah, and I think we've got to be careful. We don't want to be the kind of God of the gaps type arguers. But you see, with Professor Hawking, even if he had a theory which said this is how quantum fluctuations lead to a universe, the Christian and the philosopher indeed can say, but where does quantum theory itself come from?
Yeah.
Where does the order and the universality of the laws of nature, where do they come from? Now that's a metaphysical question. It goes beyond physics because physics assumes that the laws are there. But it's a valid question. Yeah. And for me, the only answer to that makes sense is that the universality and the order of the universe are a reflection of a faithful sustainer God.
Amazing. Would you like to add anything, Matt?
I think he's said everything we can. That's very good, thank you.
You have a real skill for this, David, of seeing God in all of these places and, like you said, stretching your image of who God is based on whether it's something based on physics that you're looking at or popular culture. We were talking about Star Trek right at the beginning. And you have this other little book, Life, the Universe and Everything, 42 Meditations for Lent and Beyond, where you go through and literally every meditation is something else from popular culture. So there's one on The Simpsons, I think, and I'm forgetting what they are now. But
that's all right, so have I.
Yes. The Simpsons was in it.
Yeah, The Simpsons were in it.
It's my level then.
That's right, it's good.
But this inspired me to do an extra game, if you two are on board for this.
Okay.
Because we've got just a few minutes left.
Oh, right.
And I think if you can find Jesus in The Simpsons and in quantum physics, then you should be able to tell me how anything is like Jesus.
Okay.
So you can tag team this one.
Matt,
Doesn't have to be.
I'm looking to you on this. You're the ordained priest.
I'm just going to flipping heck. What's that?
So I'm going to give you, I think we'll do 2 minutes each time for this one.
Okay.
Wow.
I'd like to know why Jesus is like headphones, please.
Who's taking this?
Wow.
You can tag team.
Okay.
Well, Matt, I mean, after you, please.
So the time is running, flipping heck. Right, so why is Jesus like headphones? Well, Jesus is like headphones because obviously we when we put on headphones, we take time to listen to something. You generally don't put on headphones unless you want to do something with them, whether it's to quiet out noise outside or it's to listen to something that you want to listen to. It's a deliberate act to put on a set of headphones. And like our relationship with Jesus, it's a deliberate act that we do. Like any relationship, it's a deliberate act. It's our choice, though, when we put on those headphones, whether we really listen in and tune in to what's going on. I put on headphones sometimes when I'm working in my workshop making something, and it's just to drown out the noise. I don't really listen to what's there. But like with Jesus, we can take that deliberate time to listen to what's there. We need to. We can go to church, which is putting the headphones on, but unless we actually open our ears and listen, then we miss something so much bigger.
It's really, I like that a lot.
Thank you.
It's not
Just
at all.
made it up.
I know. The other way of looking at this in terms of the relationship to Jesus is to say, what does it tell us about being human? And Matt, you picked on this, the sense that sometimes we need space, we need just ourselves. Sometimes headphones listening to music is a celebration of play, of joy, of expression of human emotions, sometimes in certain bands with depression. There's something about music and spoken word which allows us to understand what it means to be human in a much deeper way. Now that's a sense in which then the reflection of our humanness brings us back to what we're all about. The importance of relationship, the importance of community, of which God in Jesus is the one who gives the perfect sense of what it means to be human.
Beautiful. Look at the professionals up here. I need to tell you, by the way, the reason I came up with this game was because I had to do this as in church training as a teenager. They made us stand up and gave us a random thing and told us to tell the room why that was like Jesus.
Gosh, that's scary.
So the next one I would like to give you is the one that was given to me at the age of 15.
The age of 15.
At the age of 15. And it says, why is Jesus like a bogey?
Like a
bogey.
Like snot.
Oh, a bogey?
Yes.
Oh, what? At the age of 15?
At the age of
you were
15.
What kind of church were you going to?
We're not going to sully any names here.
I'm a physicist. I don't deal with biological reality, such things. I'm just filling at the moment, Matt, because I've got no idea what I would say.
Well, I think it's like a bogey because to really get to the richness of who Jesus is, you've really got to dig deep. Got to get into there. And, it's on surface level as well. Jesus can be a problem, as we know. Jesus says to love your enemy, and that can be icky. Why do you want to love your enemy? But then as we play around with it and see, it's actually quite fun. And also, it's always better shared and flicking at other people. You're the one who gave me this. I don't know why you're actually discussing with me. You knew I'd go there.
Louise, I do something called Thought for the Day from time to time. And one of the kind of lampoons of Thought for the Day is that, you kind of take a subject and then you go, and Jesus is a bit like that. And indeed, many preachers do that as well. I don't think I've ever come across, and Jesus might be a bit like that in referring to bogies.
Yeah, I mean, Matt's outraged that I look disgusted. I don't look disgusted. I have utmost respect. My answer was Jesus is a bit like a bogey because he's very good at sticking around.
Well done. That was actually really nice.
I can see what I'm going to be speaking about on Radio 4 very soon on that.
Can you please credit me if you...
Yeah.
Absolutely. That would be fantastic. I'd love to hear that on Radio 4. I'm imagining the complaint letters right now. We are very nearly at the end of our time, so I would like to ask you, David, what is next for you? What are you working on at the moment, or what are you excited about?
One of the things I'm working on at the moment is a project called Equipping Christian Leadership in an Age of CiS. And linked into a talk that we heard earlier this evening at this conference, And that is the phase in which the science-theology conversation has a very important global context to it. We've been working with mainline denominations for a number of years. And then we began to realize that our work in science and theology wasn't connecting with black majority churches, which is a growing sector of the Christian church here. And sitting down with a number of leaders from that community, asking why, they reminded me, they told me gently, I wish I'd known it, that within black communities, the word science is heard in a slightly different way to the way it is in white communities. So eugenics, medical experimentation, technology that recognizes a white face rather than a black face. And actually, that led us to begin to think about how context affects how people see the relationship between science and Christian faith. And so we're working with a number of international partners at the moment, not to export what we've been doing in the UK, but actually to learn together how Christian leaders see science in Asia, in Africa, in Eastern Europe. And to be honest, Louise, it's wonderful. I am learning so much because when you look at different contexts, you begin to see the blind spots in your own context.
Absolutely.
And things that I've never thought about before, I'm beginning to think about. And at this stage of life, that's thrilling to do that.
That's
Beautiful.
amazing. I love it as well because I get to come here and celebrate science with all of you guys and get excited about the things that you do, which is super exciting to me because I do language and culture as a day job. And you're getting excited about my world, which is fantastic for me. So I'm really, pleased to hear that that's all going on. Thanks so much for joining us. Cue outro music, please. Thanks for joining us. You can get in touch with questions, comments and suggestions on Instagram at Now There's a Thought, which looks exactly like Now Teresa Thought, but that's just a happy coincidence. If your name is Teresa and you'd like to help us live up to our Instagram handle, you can get in touch for that too. Have a look at our show notes for details of David's books and follow us on Instagram and your podcast provider to get notifications of future episodes. Don't forget to tell your friends if you enjoyed the podcast, but not if you didn't, because that's no help.
Thank you.